There's space in the front. It's always like in the bus, right? There's also space in the front. My dad would have said, I don't bite. He was a teacher, so that goes the same for me. All right. That's quite the turnout. I didn't actually expect that on a Friday afternoon, to be honest. Awesome that you're here. I'm Antonia, and today I want to share a bit of my learnings and insights about my journey in building a tech startup after having worked at Google with you. But bear with me because it's Friday, it's super late, we've all had a lot of popcorn. So let me start with a short question to really shake things up a bit. So who of you knows Google? Yeah, thank you. And those of you who didn't raise their arms, I don't quite believe you. And who knows Uplifted? At least the three guys in the front, that's my team. Good answer. Yeah, that's not that surprising, even though we're trying to change that. But that just gives you some idea of what I mean by growing from big to small, right? It's more like growing from massive to really small. And to give you a bit of a taste of what type of learnings you might expect from me, let me share a short story. So I just quit my job at Google, and I was talking to my soon-to-be tech co-founder, and things were going pretty good. And he was like, yeah, let's chat on Slack. I was like, what's Slack? Imagine my surprise. I mean, I was at Google for 7 years, and I suddenly learned that no one outside of Google is using Google Chat or Hangouts for chatting. So that's the type of stuff that I also had to relearn a bit. But it did work before. No, that was too far. Okay. Before we dive a bit more into these gems, and I promise I won't touch Google+, let me tell you a bit about myself. So my co-founder Klaus and I, we founded Uplifted last year, and we're building a software for feedback and people development because we believe that too many people actually get too little or bad feedback, and we really want to change that. We're VC-backed, so that actually makes me a female VC-backed tech founder who also has a small kid. And the reason I'm saying it like that is because I'm one of not too many, and I think that this really needs to change, and this is why I'm saying it at every chance that I have to practically raise awareness. Like I said before, I used to work at Google before founding Uplifted, and I loved my job. I loved working at Google, I loved my team, I loved my job. And the one thing I actually loved most about working at Google and in that particular job as a people manager was the people development part. And that's what actually drove me to venture out and build my own business in that space. And when I started working and building Uplifted, I was kind of romanticizing startup life a bit. I mean, you read stuff like 9 out of 10 startups fail, and of course you're thinking, well, our idea is awesome, so of course we're not going to fail, we're going to be the 10th one. And then you're reading all the celebratory posts on LinkedIn about how awesome entrepreneurial life is, and you're going like, yes, I'm pumped, let's do this. But to be honest, I've always worked hard in my life and in my career, but nothing really prepared me how hard it is to build a startup. There's so much uncertainty, there's lots of pressure, and I mean, you're actively trying to beat the odds, and that's nothing that comes easy. But at the same time, it's incredibly rewarding. I mean, I'm working on something that I'm super passionate about. I'm building a product from scratch. I had like the steepest learning curve I've ever had. And I'd been catapulted so far out of my comfort zone that I don't think I can even see it anymore. And I think that's awesome. So yes, building a startup is awesome, but it's also really hard. And here comes my controversial statement of the day. You can disagree if you want. I think that building a startup after having worked at one of the most loved tech giants in the world is actually a little bit harder even. Of course, it comes with certain good stuff, like you get that stamp of approval on your CV, you might have the one or the other connection happening for you. But it entails a lot of stuff that I think makes it a bit harder for you. And I think that goes for all big corps, not just Google. Because I think that when you move away from a big company like that, you're not only giving up on like the 3-star meals every day and the free massages, but you also really have to relearn how to think. You have to relearn how to do certain stuff because seriously, you never had to do it before. And this is why I think it's sometimes a bit harder to come out of a big tech giant to start a company. But Before we dive into my learnings, let's rewind a bit and start at the beginning, because I think that some of the, there's space up front if you want to come down. I think that some of the things of building a startup and working at Google are pretty similar, and that might be surprising a bit. But I think that some of the work ethics and character traits that helped me be successful at Google are helping me now tremendously to build my own company. One of the first things I would say is intrinsic motivation and grit. I mean, at Google, there are like, I think, over 150,000 people working there now. And when you start working there, you're just like one tiny person inside that huge group. And with actually what feels like 1,000 of them, you're trying to get that same promotion or competing for that leadership role that just opened up. So don't get me wrong, there are lots of good stuff happening to you when you work at Google by itself. But if you really want to get ahead in that competitive environment and in that huge org, it really comes down to you. You need to be your own biggest advocate. You need to take the reins. You need to put in that motivation and grit. And to be honest, in an early stage startup, there's nothing but your motivation and grit that will get you from day to day. So this is definitely helping, I think. The next thing is networking and people skills. I read the other day that when you're building a startup, you're always selling, and I think that's true. I mean, you're trying to sell your company to investors. You're trying to sell your company to potential employees. You're trying to sell your services or products to customers, and you're trying to sell yourself basically as that one person who can do that incredibly hard job. And I think that this requires people and networking skills. You need to be able to build relationships really quickly, and you need to a certain degree make people fall in love with you a bit. And let me tell you a secret, you also need that at Google, because like I said before, it's a huge org. It is competitive. It's not all fluffy and everything. So if you really want to get ahead, you need that group of sponsors and fans that will just help you get along that journey. And I think that in both cases, you need a good sense of opportunity and urgency. In a company like Google, that could mean having a good feeling for what type of project or product will get a lot of attention in the upcoming months. So you actually are working on something great and get good visibility, or having a good understanding what's important for your customers so you can really get a big deal off of that. And in a startup, I mean, everything's urgent and important. And a good sense of urgency really helps you to filter through the noise and find the stuff that you need to focus on, find the stuff where 80-20 just works, and actually also find the stuff that you shouldn't really worry about that much. So let's park that. That was the stuff that was I felt was pretty similar. Let's move to what I really learned and where I think I had to relearn how to think and how to do stuff. You'll actually never get as much rejection in your life as when you're building a startup. And remember when I said you're always pitching? Well, you're always hearing no all the time from investors, from customers, from potential employees, from people who you tell your idea and they just don't like it. And to be honest, my life so far has been pretty smooth sailing compared to that. I really had to get used to that level of rejection, to be honest, to not let it drag me down. And at the same time, I mean, in a startup, especially in early stage, you're a small team. And as a founder, you're in a pretty exposed role. So it gets a bit lonely sometimes. So there is no boss who will just give you praise for a job well done. And I mean, at Google, I literally had hundreds of colleagues who were doing the exact same job that I did. So it was really easy to go to them for feedback. Like, how are you doing that? How are you solving that challenge? How did I do? And in a startup, you just don't have that. So I'm super, super thankful for my co-founder because it really helps to not go through that alone. And I actively build my feedback network. So I have lots of mentors and advisors who I actively reach out to ask for feedback and get a bit of sparring coming in. And I also self-reflect a lot. So I actually journal about stuff that went well. It really helps me focus on the good things when things might get tough a bit. It helps me gain a bit of focus sometimes. So that's what I never did at Google, to be honest, but I'm doing now quite heavily. When I needed a new notebook or a pen at Google, I just went to the stationery cupboard and got one. It was always stocked. Well, now there is no stationery cupboard unless I stock it. And even with that super simple thing, a surprisingly complex choice comes along. Like, how many notebooks do I get? Do I get the good ones? They're more expensive. Do I get the bulk discount? I mean, every stamp and every service suddenly costs money, and this will affect your runway. Every product decision you do and make is actually having cost attached to it. Some like very real costs like salaries or production costs, and others more like opportunity costs. So it means that you can't focus on another thing, or that you will disappoint a customer because they actually wanted another feature first. And you have to make these decisions super fast because you're pressed for time all the time. So that's also something that has been different at Google, because to be honest, at Google, some of the smaller stuff like what type of notebooks were stocked, I didn't need to worry about at all. And some of the bigger stuff, that was further up the food chain. I had nothing to do with that. So I had a much smaller decision radius, and I could also weigh the options much better, and I had more time for it usually. So that was quite different. What I do now is a good mix of forecasting. I love a good spreadsheet. And we have good discussions about the risk and opportunities and costs and benefits attached to each decision we do. That is a major factor for us. And I also try to not sweat the small stuff so much, even though sometimes that feels a bit hard in your daily hustle. When I mean some stuff you can't control, I actually mean a lot of stuff you can't control. Like early stage is early stage. Timing is everything. You could have the best idea and the best team, and timing might just suck, or market conditions might change. Or for example, you've been working on closing a customer deal for like a long time and things look really good. You're this close to closing, and then suddenly something on their management end changes and the deal is off the table. Or you discover a bug that needs urgent attention, and that means that the product roadmap needs to get pushed out a bit. This is stuff that's outside of your control. And at Google, to be honest, stuff outside of my control usually meant that someone, again, higher up the food chain would take care of it. I didn't need to worry about it. Or that that huge and massive org would just somehow absorb it. There was just a bigger safety net. And in a startup, there is no safety net. So these things, the stuff that's outside of your control, can actually make or break things. And playing what if in your head and focusing too much on that level of uncertainty, it will get you nothing but sleepless nights. That's a hard truth I had to learn, and I'm still learning, trying to learn, to not focus on that stuff too much, to take a step back actively and try to focus on the things that I can control and make the best out of that. Because I believe the other thing, focusing on the stuff that you can't control, will just make you unhappy. I used to work in sales at Google, and let me tell you, sales now is very, very different. Because people, when I worked at Google, they actually wanted to talk to me. I mean, we were one of their largest traffic providers for their e-commerce business. So when I knocked on their door and said, hey, you want to meet, even with a C-level, they were usually like, yeah, sure, come in, today is good. And that's quite different now. I mean, that glamour is gone. No one wants to talk to me anymore because of some fancy employer. So I have every step of that conversation actually convinced the people that it's worth it to have that conversation with me. But the good thing about that is I can control the narrative now. So I can make that pitch. I can create that storyline. I can go to market like crazy. I can throw in everything I have. And actually, when you make that sale or get that conversation, you feel just so much more proud than you ever did before. You all probably know the saying, there is no free lunch. Well, at Google there is, like 3 times a day, if you want. But I believe in startup life there isn't. So networking is super important. I said before, networking at Google is also important. But I think in a startup, it's bread and butter business. It can actually help propel your business forward. It's where you get intros to customers, to investors. It will give you exposure and leads and everything else. So it's super important. The thing is, at Google, networking was part of my job role, right? So I did it during my work time. I was paid to do it. There was a very clear scope and agenda on when I should do it and to what extent and what I should get out of it. So I actually networked with customers at specific events or in specific networks. It was pretty predefined, so I didn't have to worry about it that much, and that made it feel a lot easier. And now in a startup, things are pretty different again, because I have to actively make time for networking. It's such an important part of the business, but it takes time away from me to do other stuff like building the product or trying to sell it like crazy. So you need to factor in the time. And every time there is a networking opportunity, I have to define the agenda and the scope. So I have to say, is it worth this? How much do I put into it? What do I want to get out of it? And that can feel a bit more difficult. And I mean, networking for many people, it's like a red flag. They say, I don't like networking. leave me alone with that. So it can be quite easy to let it slide a bit in favor of building the product or doing things that you're actively or actually more comfortable with. But my recommendation would be, and that's what I'm trying to do, is actively network. Invest the time, go to that lunch, join that network, reach out to old contacts, because it will pay back double. Here a confession. The other day, something happened to me that would have never happened at Google. I forgot the birthday of one of our team members. And we're not that big a team, so that was pretty embarrassing. At Google, I would have never forgotten it because we had a very clearly defined birthday ritual, like who would get what type of present, who would get the present for them, how would the desk be decorated, who would do that. And suddenly I realized I'm the culture. If I don't do that, if I don't build these rituals, no one else will. My co-founder and I, we're the ones responsible for creating our company culture. We're the ones responsible for being role models about what type of work-life balance we want to have, how we want to work together as a team. And if we don't do that, that's just not going to happen. And I think that it will negatively affect the team and what we can get out of our endeavors. So what helped me was realizing that I don't have to do it overnight. I can play it by ear a bit, and I don't have the next Google culture in a heartbeat. So that really helped me, again, putting stuff a bit more into perspective. So that was some of the relearning processes I did, and I tried to also give you a bit of detail about what I made from that and what I took away from it. So if you fast forward a bit, so what would be the 3 tips I would probably give to potential entrepreneurs? It would probably be something along these lines. Write a journal. In some or the other way, self-reflect, because it will really help you focus and it will really help you put things into perspective. Find something that's working for you. For me, it's a Google Doc with a table, and make a little habit or a ritual around it, because it will help you. Building a startup is hard, so if you can focus on the good stuff from once in a while and need an external reminder, be the one that reminds yourself. I think it's also really important to be very aware that you are a role model when you do it. And not only inside of your company about the behavior you want in your company, but every time you're on stage like I am right now or interacting with people, you're always the ambassador for your company. And also kind of I'm one ambassador for a female startup founder. So it's big shoes to fill, I think. And I try to be very conscious about what type of behavior I show and how I behave, and I try to behave in a way that I would like others to behave too. So also what's important, I think, is being open about mistakes you make. I think having a good failure culture is super important to grow, especially in early stage, because there's just so much that can go wrong, and it's every time a learning opportunity. Oh, sorry, I forgot one. And also, build that network. I know it can seem like a stretch sometimes to do it, and it can feel a bit uncomfortable, but I promise it will get easier over time, and it will pay back. And I also had to learn the hard way how to say no sometimes. That's also part of networking, seeing what is a good networking opportunity and when it's just a one-way street, and then stepping away from that also. And with all that said, I mean, would I do it again? Would I quit my job at Google to build a startup? Yes, in a heartbeat. I mean, what else can I say? I'm standing here today. But building something that I'm so passionate about and building it from scratch and seeing our product vision come to life and building something where I believe that we're going to solve a lot of people's problems, that's absolutely priceless. So with that, onward and upward. That was short and sweet, so that's it.